قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني وسبحان الله.
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلوات ربي وسلامه عليه. أما بعد, I am very happy to be with you here today. It's my first day in Nashville. Alhamdulillah, I've been meeting beautiful brothers and sisters ever since. And I hope that Allah Azza wa Jal blesses this gathering here. The Prophet ﷺ, he told us that مَا اجْتَمَعَ قَوْمٌ فِي بَيْتٍ مِّن بِيُوتِ اللَّهِ يَتْلُونَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَيَتَدَارَسُونَهُ بَيْنَهُم, that there's never any group of people who gather in a house from the houses of Allah, reciting the book of Allah together and studying it amongst themselves, except that the angels descend upon them and tranquility descends upon them, and the angels surround them with their wings, and mercy envelops them, and Allah Azza wa Jal remembers them with who is with Him. And so I hope, inshallah ta'ala, that this night is one that is written as such, and that we see its reward on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen. So today we're actually going to be talking about a topic that's very important, it's very relevant, and it's something that is, I hope, just a catalyst. It is something that's I'm not going to be sharing a lot of solutions, because it's something that is developing and something that people need to think about and people need to discuss. But in case you haven't had this discussion going yet, I wanted to begin this discussion. I don't know if you remember, in the 90s, there used to be a commercial that used to come on. It wasn't a commercial, it was more of a public service announcement at 10 o'clock. So 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock you have your prime time shows, and then 10 o'clock is the news. And so right before the news would come on, there would be this camera that was zooming into a dark alley, and the voice would say, "It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?" Does anybody remember that? It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? And the premise, what do you think that commercial is saying? When it says, "It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?" What do you guys get from that? I'm asking, by the way. What do you get from that?
Keep your children safe.
Keep your children safe. Good. What else do you get from that?
Literally, where are your children?
Literally, where are your children, right? So what the commercial is saying, hey, if you're a good parent, then right now it's 10 o'clock. You should know, one, literally, where are your children? And two, you should be seeking to keep them safe. Exactly. And if you're not a good parent, then you know what? It's 10 o'clock, your children are still outside, you still don't know where your children are. You don't know what they may be up to. And so the reason why I wanted to begin this topic mentioning that commercial is because I found it to be very relevant. It was actually a national campaign that was being done at the time. But for human history, for the entire duration of human history, if you wanted to know where your children are, you just had to keep them physically inside at home. I know where my children are, they're upstairs. I know where my children are, they're in the living room. I know where my children are, they're in the basement, right? But now, over the past 5 to 10 years, for the first time in human history, your children can be inside the house and you have no idea where they are. Through technology, the world can come inside. And so your children will be in the living room, but you still don't know who's talking to them. Your children are upstairs. You still don't know who they're talking to, who they're interacting with, right? Through technology, the world can come inside. And so I'm just going to be sharing a couple of points with regards to this. Some of it is going to be a little bit blatant, right? You may be worried about some of the young children here, so I'm going to try to keep it as vague as possible, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. Number one, why should we talk about this topic? And why is it important? The reason why it's important is because, you know, the story that made me think about this was a man came to me in the masjid one time and he said, Ammar, I really need you to talk to my son. My son is 13 years old and he's beginning to talk to girls. He's 13 and now you know what's about to happen. I'm starting to get text messages where he's talking to girls and things like that. So I asked him, I said to him, well, what type of phone does your son have? He said, he has an iPhone, of course. So he said, he has got an iPhone, of course. And I said to him, well, what do you want me to do? You're like the person who slaughters his own child and then calls the ambulance and tells them, resuscitate them, resuscitate them, resuscitate them. You're doing more damage than anyone else by giving them something like that. You're giving them the tools to access the world with all of the passions and mistakes of a young person, and then you're turning around and saying, make sure that he comes out okay. And then he told me, he said, well, it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility. Just like someone may come to Imam Ahmad and say, it's your responsibility. You have to take care of my kid. You have to make sure my kid turns out from a Salaf al-Salih. My kid has to become a memorizer of the Quran. And so what I said to him is, I said, it's not my responsibility directly. I mean, it's my collective, I'm part of the community and it's part of the community's responsibility. But make no mistake about it, that the responsibility of your child is whose responsibility? Absolutely. I don't think anyone consults Imam Ahmad about having a child, right? Nobody calls him up to consult him about having a child. No one consults me about having a child. And so when a person has a child of their own decision, it's their responsibility. And Allah Azza wa Jal places that responsibility on the shoulders of the parents. Allah says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. Allah says, oh you who believe, protect yourselves and protect your family from a fire. وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةِ. Its fuel is men and stones. And so, number one, Allah Azza wa Jal places that responsibility on our shoulders. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, every single one of you is a shepherd, and every single one of you is responsible for his flock. And so you are responsible for those children of yours. You're responsible for your family. That is number one. Here's something else that is very important that we keep in mind. I now recognize that it's my responsibility to take care of my children. And I want to raise them as properly as I possibly can. Do you know what the greatest image is of how to raise a child in the mind of any parent? It is how their parents raised them. So you find that you want to do with your children what your father did with you. Or the mother finds that she wants to do with her children how her mother did with her. You want to raise them in the same way. That is the prototype that you have in your mind. And that is the greatest impression that you have with regards to how to raise a child. However, if you try to raise your children in the way that your parents raised you, you may put yourself up for failure. Why? Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu is one of the geniuses that Islam produced. And he made a statement that I want you to memorize. And I'm going to share it with you now. He said, رَبُّوا أَبْنَاءَكُمْ لِجِيلِهِمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ خُلِقُوا لِجِيلٍ غَيْرَ جِيلِكُمْ. He said, raise your children for their generation, because they were raised to inhabit a world other than yours. Your parents raised you for a particular decade and a particular time and place. Ali radiallahu anhu is saying, don't raise your children to be people who inherit the 1970s or the 1980s or the 1960s. You have to raise children who are expected to be successful in 2020 and 2030 and 2040, because they were created to inherit a world that is other than yours. If the inputs are different. The output cannot be expected to be the same. Some of us are raising children not only in a different generation, but in a different land, in a different city, in a different time and place, in a different language, in a different cultural context. All of these variables are different. How can you expect the outputs to be the same? And so there's a lot of energy that needs to be exerted in raising children properly. There's a lot of energy and care and concern that every parent needs to have. And that a parent doesn't feel like, alhamdulillah, my children are fine. That's not what we learn from the Quran. If a parent ever feels like, I'm good, I don't need to worry about my children, they're great, that may be true. You may have great children. You may have great children, but that means you're not so great of a parent. Why? Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us about a man who was on his deathbed. His name was Yaqub alayhi salam. And he had great children. One of them was a prophet. His name was Yusuf. Even then, when Yaqub alayhi salam is on his deathbed, the worry of a parent and the concern of a parent doesn't stop. Allah says, أَمْ كُنْتُمْ شُهَدَاء إِذْ حَضَرَ يَعْقُوبَ الْمَوْتِ إِذْ قَالَ لِبَنِيهِ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِنْ بَعْدِي قَالُوا نَعْبُدُ إِلَهَكَ وَإِلَهَ إبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون. Yaqub on his deathbed, he's asking his children, well, what are you going to worship after me? Look at the concern of this person. Alayhi salam. He did not teach them anything other than Tawheed. He did not teach them anything other than Islam. And he is the best to teach because he is a prophet. And his son is a prophet. And nonetheless, the concern of a parent does not leave him at the very last moment of his life when death has approached him. He is asking his children, well, what are you going to worship after me? And they confirm, and they console, and they bring ease to his heart by saying, we are going to worship your Lord and the Lord of our fathers, Ibrahim and Ismail and Ishaq, one Lord, to him alone we submit. Right? So that's the concern of a parent. That's the diligence that has to be shared. So I wanted to look at a few things, inshallah ta'ala. And the last point as well that I want to mention with regards to the importance of this topic is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, ثَلَاثَ لَا يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةَ أَبَدًا. There are three categories of people who will never enter paradise. The first is مُدْمِنَ الْخَمْرِ. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is talking about the person who's addicted to alcohol. The second is, he says, ad-dayuth. And the third, he mentions, are men who imitate, or women who imitate men. So these three. And when the Prophet ﷺ says that they're never ever going to enter paradise, it doesn't mean never ever 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 going to enter paradise, but it means that their entrance into paradise is going to be very delayed. Okay? Because we believe that the person who's addicted to alcohol is going to eventually enter paradise if they died upon Islam. Now, the Sahaba, they said, as for the mutmin al-khamr, we know who that is. But who is ad-dayuth, ya Rasulullah? What is that? What does that term mean? And the Prophet ﷺ said, ad-dayuth is the one who doesn't care who's talking to his family. The one who doesn't care who his daughter's talking to. The one who doesn't care who his son is talking to. The one who doesn't care who his family has access to, or her family has access to. This person, the Prophet ﷺ said, they're not going to enter paradise. And so the challenges are great and the stakes are high, the risks are high. How do we create a balance in our homes with regards to getting our children the things that they want, but at the same time protecting them? The Prophet ﷺ, he says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَيَعْجَبُ مِنْ شَابٍ لَيْسَتْ لَهُ صَبْوَةٌ. The Prophet ﷺ said, Allah is amazed at a young person who does not have a sabwa, who does not have, the ulama, they said, sabwa is maylun ila al-hawa. It is an inclination towards fulfilling their passions and their basest desires. And so that's the nature of being young. Youthfulness is to be matched with severe passion, severe mistakes, and how do you protect that as best as you can as a family? So the first thing that I wanted to look at are cell phones. Is there anybody here who doesn't have a cell phone? Raise your hand. Everybody here has a cell phone. Okay. Okay, except for you and you too. Okay. Good job, Dad. Okay. So in a Pew Internet research, it showed that 71% of teens had cell phones in this country, with 59% having phones at the age of 12 to 14 and 83 between 15 and 17. And I expect that this number has gone up because this was a couple years old. So 15 to 17, 83% of teenagers had cell phones. And you can't really use the argument that, oh, our kids don't need cell phones. No, they do. They need to have contact. You need to, if there's an emergency, you need them to be able to call home. And even, subhanAllah, I don't know, I've noticed payphones, you don't even see them anymore. Payphones used to be very prevalent on the streets. Used to be every corner there was a payphone. You don't even see them anymore. So there's really not a way, there's no alternative to cell phones in that regard. But the thing that I want you to think about, that I would like everyone here to think about, is what type of cell phones are really needed? What type of cell phones are really needed to communicate? Most parents, you talk to them and you say, hey, what did you get your child a cell phone for? They'll say, I want to be able to call them. I want to know where they are. Okay, now, when you get your child an iPhone 6 or a Samsung Galaxy or what have you, it can do a lot more than simply call. You don't need an iPhone for that. It gives you unrestricted access to the internet, all of the websites. You can make video calls, you can take pictures, you can do so many different things with an iPhone. It's literally like having a computer. My question is that really needed? That's the question that I want you to think about. Is that really needed? Is that what my child wants? Is that what my child needs? With your average iPhone, you can video chat, you have full access to the internet, you can download any video off the internet, you can have access to email, text messaging. Remember, do you guys remember when AOL, when you would get an AOL computer set up in your apartment or in your house, and the first thing that parents would do would be they would set up parental controls, right? So they would set up parental controls, which meant that if your child was 10 years old, you would set up and you would give them access to the internet that was appropriate for a 10-year-old. And if your child was 15, you would give them access to the internet that was appropriate for a 15-year-old. And if someone was 18 years old, you would give them access to the internet that was appropriate for an 18-year-old. My point is that parents used to set this up. It was the first thing. It was very easy for a parent to set up as soon as they brought internet into the house. But the more and more I talk to parents on this issue, I find that most parents feel like technology has gone too much for them, and it's too much to think about. And so I'm just going to give my family internet and hope for the best. Right? And that's really dangerous. That's like throwing someone into the water and saying, by the way, please don't get wet. And you're throwing them into an ocean. So this is something that I want you to pay attention to. So your child, our young brothers and sisters, our teenagers, they all have, with all of these phones, they have unfettered access to the internet. Well, how does that affect them? Well, look at some of these campaigns, or some of these. In 2008, this survey, a survey that was conducted by the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy, 20% of the overall teens surveyed indicated that they had sent and posted nude or semi-nude pictures or videos of themselves. Okay, so this is 2008. 20% of the teens surveyed, 20%, that's 1 out of every 5. You take 5 kids, 1 of them had said that I had already sent a nude or semi-nude picture of myself. Additionally, 39% of the surveyed teenagers indicated that they had sent or posted suggestive messages. Okay? Finally, the survey noted that 50% of the teens said that they received such messages. Approximately 1/3 of the respondents reported engaging in explicit related activity. I hope you know what I mean. And 24% of minors aged 14 to 17 reported involvement in some type of nude texting. In addition, 1 in 10 young people have shared a naked image of themselves. And finally, the most staggering of the findings include that these types of texts often have unintended viewers and are often forwarded as a form of social currency by those looking to show off or be funny. Now, what does that mean? we have 39% saying, of teens, saying, 39, saying that we have sent suggestive messages. You have 50% saying that they've received such messages. They've received these messages. 1/3, 50%, guys. I don't want you to tune out and say, oh, well, my kids are Muslim. That's the biggest mistake that a person can do. He says, oh, my kids are Muslim, so all of these things that they're talking about, these are the non-Muslims. No. What affects the non-Muslims affects the Muslims. They're growing up in this society. What is cool amongst the non-Muslims is cool amongst the Muslims. It's part of the community. They're part of everything. They're part of everything. And so you have to look at it like, if this is a dilemma, or if this is an epidemic in the general society, then most likely it is an epidemic in the Muslim community as well. And so these numbers, I don't want you to turn off your mind and get bored and be like, oh, well, this has nothing to do with us. No, this has everything to do with us. This has everything to do with us. And so 24% of minors aged 14 to 17 reported some type of nude imaging that they sent. In addition, 1 in 10 have shared images of themselves. And finally, the most staggering of the findings, that these texts, now what does that mean? These texts have unintended viewers. It means, and this is something that even in the Muslim community, brothers have told me. Some of my young brothers, they told me that there would be brothers who would talk to girls and they'd be sweet talkers. So they talk to the girl, she thinks he likes her, or maybe he does like her, what have you. And then he will go and get a picture of her without her hijab on, or maybe even more than that. But he doesn't keep that picture to himself, but rather he's going to forward it, or he's going to share it at the very least with his friends. Why? It says here, it increases them in social currency. I'm the man. Look, I'm talking to 3 sisters right now. Look at this one, she's got her hijab. Yeah, I know she's a hijabi, but look at this, right? So this increases them in social currency. Guys look at girls like they're conquests. So the more conquests they have, the more of a man they are. And so this is one of the problems that is really spreading so vast and wide, this issue of texting with very, very, very explicit content. Why is this such a problem? It's because we lived in an age, I caught the end of it, alhamdulillah, and all of the brothers who are older than me, and the sisters, they all experience this as well, where, like I mentioned to you, the natural state of a young person is to make mistakes. In fact, Allah is amazed at someone who's young and grows up, mashallah, righteous and never makes mistakes. Passions walk with young people, and extremism walks with young people. When you're a kid, you're getting into fights every day after school. You become an adult, you don't get into fights anymore, right? All of those passions are gone. They've calmed down. But when you were young, to my older brothers and sisters, and you would get into a fight, or you would make a mistake, that mistake remained and was saved in the memory of those people who were witness to that event. 10, 15, 20 people, maybe 30 who were there, they remember it, and maybe even over time they've forgotten about it. But now, go to any high school or middle school in the country, and 2 kids are fighting. There's 2 kids who are fighting, and there's another 10 kids doing what? That's what they're doing. They're like this. World Star Hip Hop. It's going to YouTube. That's where it's going. And so these mistakes are getting uploaded online. Now, what if these mistakes are mistakes of an explicit nature? Well, then it becomes disastrous for that person. Because once something goes online, it never ever really comes off. And you'll find in the most extreme cases that some people, they even have to imagine a person goes, when a person's looking for a job, and the first thing that they do when your job employer is doing is that they're going to Google your name. It's the simplest thing they're going to do. they're going to Google your name. Now imagine they Google that person's name and the first thing that comes up on Google is some mistake that they made from 7-8 years ago. And when I was doing research on this topic, I found that there are entire communities, there are entire websites that are devoted to slighted lovers, where people used to date or they were impassioned to each other at some point in time, and they want to get back at their ex, and so they take all of this sensitive imagery, videos, material, and they throw it up online and destroy this person's life. As soon as you Google that person's name, that's the first thing that comes up. Some people have gone to needed to actually change their names. That's how devastating it can be. So that's the first. The second is another dangerous item that is really causing havoc is pornography. And if you were to go back 10, 15 years, more like 15, 20, if a person wanted to have access to pornography, they'd have to walk into one of those weird stores and be terrified that somebody sees them walking in or walking out. But now, you have access to it everywhere. And so a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, you can have a situation where a person is addicted to pornography at the age of 10. A boy, addicted to pornography at the age of 10 or 11. And some of the highest numbers that I've seen is that 90% of males have viewed pornography. 90%. So that number is, Sallim Rabbi Sallim, it's disastrous. Now, what are some of the problems with pornography? Well, one, the dopamine that's released in the brain is just like the dopamine that's released from the brain from any drug. And it is addictive just like any drug. You have people who go, and once they get involved in viewing pornography, they see that which is normal is no longer normal for them, and they continue to need that which is more and more and more and more and more to have the same effect of interest. They get bored by that which is normal. And how does that have an effect on a person who's now 12 years old or 11 years old or 13 years old? Well, just look at it. If you have a person who has been viewing pornography, say for the time they were 12 years old, 15 years later, they're 27 years old. And the brother's name, let's say, is Ahmed, and he wants to get married. And he's a great brother in the community, comes from a great family. But people didn't know that he's been addicted to pornography for 15 years. Quietly. And so Ahmed marries Fatima. And Fatima's a beautiful girl from the community. And anybody would be happy to have her. But the problem is that Ahmed is not that amazed by Fatima's beauty. You see, Ahmed, for the past 15 years, has been seeing a different woman every single day. Not just one, but 20 in a given viewing session, right? And so he's not super impressed. Not only that, but there's a major problem as well, is that he has gotten accustomed to, whenever his passions are incited, he simply has to go to a website, click a few buttons, and get release. Fatima, however, is a living, breathing woman. She has moods. She has a lot of different knobs that you have to figure out and work out for you to get what you want. Right? You're dealing with a person, you're not dealing with a machine. And Ahmed is not used to all of that. It's extremely frustrating to him. It's not normal for him. It's abnormal for him. And so here, where you have two people and you would think this would be a great marriage, there aren't going to be any problems. In fact, you find that it is extremely rocky and extremely disastrous because of this problem that he had for 15 years that nobody knew about. He is just not happy with the wife that he has. And it's no problem of hers, it's no fault of hers. But it is because of what he's been exposed to. What is normal is not normal for him anymore. And that's extremely dangerous. The third thing that I wanted to pay attention to is just the importance of waiting. We live in a society now where everything is supposed to come to you so fast. Fast food, fast internet, everything has to be streaming, everything has to be readily accessible, everything is super casual. I remember there was this one brother who was getting married, and he wasn't getting married, he wanted to get married. And so he was speaking to one of the older brothers in the community, and he said, I want to get married. He said, great, that's great news. He said, when do you want to get married? He said, I want to get married in 2 weeks. He said, you want to meet a girl and get married in 2 weeks? He said, yeah. He said to him, Ya akhi, half of the fun is in anticipating the marriage, getting everything ready, getting your apartment ready, planning, executing. He said, that's half of the fun. Taking 4 months, 5 months. Why would you give all of that up? Don't you want to experience that? He said, no, I just want to get married. That's it, 2 weeks. Okay? So this notion of a community that's growing up without wanting to wait for anything. You know, there's a book that was written by an English professor at Bucknell University. He calls it On Waiting. That's the name of the book, On Waiting. The whole book is written about the benefits of waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for anything and waiting for everything. He says, to him, waiting and delaying gratification can be regenerative and restful, as well as a time for inspiration and fresh ideas. Instant gratification, on the other hand, must be frantically repeated and is in the end no gratification at all. Do you hear that? He says instant gratification must immediately be redone. And so in the end, instant gratification becomes no gratification at all. Do you guys get that? This point is so deep. He says, I want to say it one more time, but just let me know if you don't understand it. He says, instant gratification, on the other hand, must be frantically repeated and is in the end no gratification at all. You know what? I'm chasing a certain pleasure and I get it right away, as opposed to chasing it for 2 years, chasing it for a year, chasing it for however long. And so when I get it, because I got it right away, it became worthless to me. I didn't work at all, and so I actually did not get pleasure from it. And so this instant gratification, sometimes when you just want to give your kids everything that they want right away, and you think that you are giving them gratification, in reality you are robbing them from the real source of gratification, which is to work for something, or teaching them to wait for something, and letting them taste the sweetness of waiting so that they experience the sweetness of receiving. Now, he says, indeed, instant gratification is perhaps the endless delay of gratification. So he's incorporated pauses and waiting time into his teachings to give students more time for unexpected insights about literature which he teaches. Okay, the last thing that I wanted to share with you guys is just a few, like I mentioned to you, I don't have or don't claim to have answers to these issues. What I wanted to do is I wanted to at least present some of these topics and get your minds going as a community. And I wanted to share 4 things that I think are important steps. The first is addressing these problems. Just talking about it. You know, as a community discussing it. Hey, I'm worried about my children having access to pornography. 90% of males. I mean, that's a lot. So I'm worried about my children having access to pornography. What about you? Talking as a community. Well, what can we do? I don't understand anything about technology. How can you help me? Because my kids, of course, are going to understand it better than me. And I am bringing them Wi-Fi and I'm bringing them... And by the way, to the kids who are listening, I don't want you to think that, you know, I'm presenting this like we don't trust you or anything like that. No, we do trust you. We do trust you. But this is the role of the parents, as best as they can as well, is to create for you an environment that is protected and an environment where you yourself are going to grow as a healthy individual in a sick society. And that's not easy to do. So number 1 is actually having these discussions. Don't be the person who has these issues in your household and you're too ashamed to ask for help or too ashamed to have these discussions. Don't be the person who knows this doesn't happen to my children. The person who thinks it doesn't happen to his children or her children is the one who it happens to their children. Okay, but as a community, we have to be mature enough to have these discussions. Maybe you have some people who work in IT in the community. Well, you know what? How about we do a day, for example, where people bring their devices, or people bring their routers, or people bring whatever it is that they bring, and we're going to show you how to put up security passwords, or we're going to show you how to, how to secure your home networks, for example, and make them something that is safe for your children. Right? That can be something that's done as a community. But these ideas will only come when these topics are being discussed. The second is limiting screen time. Limiting screen time as a family. And that's any screen. I remember watching an interview with Michelle Obama, the First Lady, and she was being asked how much screen time her children have. And she said, my children, they get 7 hours of screen time a week. That's any screen. Looking at their cell phones, looking at their iPad screens, looking at the TV screens, looking at whatever. Those screens, right? They get 7 hours. Other than that, they're doing something else. They're reading a book, they're playing outside, they're doing something. And so taking advantage of that, I know that's hard. But it's something that you have to look into, and there has to be commitment. If you were to be, if someone asked you, hey, would you let this drug dealer come and babysit your kids? I don't think anybody here would say yes. Yes, drug dealer, come and babysit my kids. But every single day, that's what we do. Every single day, that's what we do. We just turn on the TV for the kids, and yallah, hope you guys are okay. And you think, who do you think your kids are watching? Right? They're watching people, they're watching movies, they're watching TV shows, they're watching reality shows of people that are famous in this day and age. And this day and age, man, it makes you want to look at the TV shows from the 80s and the 90s and look at these people and say, radiyallahu ankum ajma'in. That's what you want to say when you look at the TV shows from the 80s and the 90s. When you're talking about 15 years later, the level of fasad and corruption that's being shared. Okay, so limiting screen time. Number 3, and by the way, one of the things that I want you to look up as well with regards to limiting screen time is if you type this into Google, you can type it into Google now if you want to look for it. It's called Mom's iPhone Contract. Mom's iPhone Contract. And this I thought was a really, really smart mother who she gave our son, he was 13 years old, she gave him a contract. And she basically, in the contract, she gave 18 points or maybe more that she needed for this child, her son, to sign and to agree to before he received an iPhone. And so again, it's about finding a balance that works for your family. It's not just a matter of saying, no, you're never going to have it. Why? Because I don't trust you. No, having a discussion with your children. So what she did was she gave him a contract, and she said, sign this contract. Now, the first point in the contract was, this iPhone is mine, it's not yours. Which I thought was really important. Sometimes your children will say, oh, you took my iPhone away. You took my phone away. Now when your child says, you took my phone away, now when you take your child's phone away from them, then you're a zalim. Because you took something that's not yours. But if you make it clear to them from the beginning that this phone was purchased with my money, and so it is my phone that I'm giving to you to use, then you're giving it to them becomes an act of benevolence. And you're taking it away from them becomes an act of justice. You see? It's not an act of oppression anymore. So the first thing she does is she says, it's my phone. And then she has a number of other points. So she says, for example, you will always answer the phone when mom and dad call. Agreed? He has to agree to that. Number 3 is, I will always know the password. Who knows the password of their child's phones? I will always know the password. Number 5, she says no pornography. Number 6, she has a lot of different points, and it's very good for you to read, as well as tailor it according to what you think is relevant to your family. Another thing that she did, by the way, something that was very interesting, is that she would take the phone at 7 o'clock when the child came home. She would take it away. Khalas, you're done. And this is going to vary, right? You don't do that with a 17-year-old baby or an 18-year-old. But maybe with an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old, they don't need it after 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. And then she would give it to them in the morning leaving for school. The point is, this becomes a point of conversation with you and your children. Number 3, also look into plans in detail and to not be clueless to the capabilities of the phones that you purchase. You know, when Blackberries first came out, you know, the whole selling point was that it was, you know, the email platform that the BlackBerry had, right? It was something that corporate people used to need. And so my question for you is, does a person who's 12 or 13 or 14, do they need access to their email 24/7? Do they need the capabilities of an iPhone? Do they need the capabilities of a Samsung Galaxy? Do they? Really? And so looking at the plans that you give to your children, do they need unlimited texting? Do they need all this data? Do they need, what is it that I want for them to have? And having a discussion with them, if you need to have a discussion, and getting something that is appropriate, putting some thought into it, and to not just go into this whole issue blindly. And the last thing is empower children when they're young. Giving them responsibility. I think that the iPhone contract that the mother gives is a great example of giving responsibility. She's basically giving him something that's very good, and she's saying, here, as long as you fulfill these conditions, then you deserve it. And if you don't fulfill these conditions, then it's going to be taken away from you. But giving children a sense of responsibility, giving them a sense of purpose, giving them something that they're responsible for, so that they grow into people who are confident in themselves. They grow into people who are people of himmah, people of ambition, people of maturity. They're not people who are just lost souls playing video games 23 hours a day or 20 hours a day or what have you. Right? That they're created for a bigger purpose than frivolity. They're created for a bigger purpose than simply play and entertainment and all of these things that people have access to 24/7, way too much nowadays. So these are some of the points that I wanted to share. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal forgiveness for any mistakes, and if I offended anyone, may Allah Azza wa Jal, ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He forgives me for that, and anything that I've said that is true and correct is from Allah Azza wa Jal. Any questions on some of these points, inshallah ta'ala, you are more than welcome.